So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Sensei Alex, and I'm honored that everyone chose to spend their time with us this afternoon. Sensei Alex Kakuyo is a Buddhist teacher and breathwork facilitator. A former Marine, he served in both Iraq and Afghanistan before finding the Dharma through a series of happy accidents. Alex has a degree in philosophy from Wabash College, and he helps students transform daily activities into spiritual practice. He is the author of Perfectly Ordinary, Buddhist Teachings for Everyday Life, which again, I think is just such a helpful book. And I really was introduced to Sensei Alex in a podcast interview where he was talking about serving as a chaplain in different protest type settings. So that's how we connected, and we've done some work together, and we were really excited for him to accept our invitation to come back and speak to us as we're exploring mindfulness, contemplative practices, and various traditions, to get an opportunity to learn about this, to get an opportunity to maybe dip our toe in the ocean to get a little taste of the practice too. So I'm going to turn things over to Sensei Alex.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, everyone, for having me. Imam Shane, thanks for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to speak with you and to speak with your students. To give you guys an idea of how I hope the next hour will go, I'd like to do a reading from my book, Perfectly Ordinary, Buddhist Teachings for Everyday Life. The essay deals with meditation and the power of meditation. After that, I'll do a brief Dharma talk. I'll lead you guys in a meditative practice that you can take with you after this session, and then we'll do a short Q&A. So, again, this is from Perfectly Ordinary, Buddhist Teachings for Everyday Life, and the essay is called Politics and the Space Between Words. I've always had a healthy respect for the power of words. It started when I was a child, growing up with books as my only friends. I loved sitting in my room for hours and letting the written word take me to places all over the universe. When I was younger, it was Ernest Hemingway's Old Man and the Sea that taught me about manhood, and Jack London's Call of the Wild that made me love the natural world. As I got older, Rudyard Kipling's The Jungle Book taught me about loyalty, and Madeleine L'Engle's A Wrinkle in Time showed me the power of faith. I like to think of these books as my first Dharma teachers. In college, my love of words turned into a love of debate. I joined my school's parliamentary debate team, and it was terrific fun. If your opponent said something you disagreed with, you could loudly yell, "For shame." And if you wanted to support your debate partner in their arguments, you could shout, "Hear, hear," to help them emphasize a point. We debated in teams of two, with one team being the government and the other team being the opposition. And there was a single moderator or judge who would both provide the debate topic and decide the winner. It was the government's job to flesh out the debate topic, define key words, and make a case, which the opposition would attempt to refute. The first round was critical because whoever controlled the definitions of the key words controlled the debate. For example, if the debate topic was, "What's good for the goose is good for the gander," the government might choose to take that statement as a metaphor, defining goose as a corporation and gander as the employee, and then defining those terms in a way that would strengthen their argument. Naturally, the opposition would respond by coming up with their own definitions, which weakened the government's argument while simultaneously making their argument stronger. As a result, I spent a small amount of time in college discussing actual debate topics, and a whole lot of time trying to pin down the exact meaning of words. Whoever came up with definitions that the judge liked best would inevitably be the winner. It was through my experiences on the debate team that I learned something mind-blowing. Words don't mean anything. There is no final, all-encompassing definition that everyone abides by for words like good, bad, or balloon. Even if you check the dictionary, you find words being used to define other words. And if you read long enough, you inevitably wind up back at the word you're trying to define. Language is nothing more than a circular logic algorithm, a nonsensical mess of symbols and sounds that we use to describe an existence that we can never truly understand. But knowing that doesn't keep me from sitting down at my laptop every night, writing words and loving every minute of it. After all, language is an illusion, but that doesn't stop it from being real. I've been thinking about this lately as it relates to our national discourse. There are a lot of words being thrown around these days, like gun control, immigration, protest, etc. People are attached to these words so much that they say and do hurtful things to one another. It's sad, but I suppose it can't be helped. For people to agree on anything, they first must agree on the meaning of the words they're using. And most people don't know what they're saying. Sure, they may have strong feelings about a topic, but it's my experience that if I ask for a clear, concise definition of terms that will hold up in parliamentary debate, they've got nothing. This can be difficult to reconcile on the surface. How can words cause so much suffering if they have no inherent existence of their own? We can't even explain what they mean. Buddha explained this dichotomy when he discussed the two-truth doctrine. The teaching states that both absolute reality, words are an illusion, and conventional reality, words are real and true, exist simultaneously. Furthermore, if we practice right view regarding these apparent opposites, then our confusion will disappear. I like to think of the two-truths doctrine in terms of a child who just watched a scary movie. If we look at the situation through the lens of the absolute, the movie isn't real. There are no monsters under the bed. There's nothing to fear. However, if we look at the same situation through the lens of the conventional reality, we still have a scared child standing in front of us who needs to be comforted. Both things are true at the same time. However, right view allows us to see and appreciate the suffering of the child without being scared ourselves, because we also see the bigger picture. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like people can see the big picture anymore. They're so caught up in words and political movements that they can't access the peacefulness of the absolute, and they do terrible things to each other as a result. But we can't ignore political debate completely. Each of us has a civic duty to be informed about the issues that affect us. It might be true that words and the larger institutions that are built upon them aren't real, but the suffering that they can cause certainly is. I try to take a middle way by forming my own opinions about various subjects, but not worrying too much if other people agree with me. I've chosen to hang up my debating boots. I have my beliefs, and I strive to live by them. But I've stopped using words to try and make others behave as I think they should. Instead, I choose to live in the space between words, the space before thoughts and diversion muddy the waters of life. It's easy to do. I just sit on my cushion, close my eyes, and breathe. As I meditate, I leave my attachments and definitions behind, finding myself in a place of stillness, a place that only exists between the last word of a sentence and the period. Lesson: use your words, or remember the peaceful place in between them. So when Imam Shane invited me to take part in this series on contemplative movements and practices, I was ecstatic because contemplation is sort of the bread and butter of Buddhism. When people think of what I do as a Buddhist minister, generally they don't think about the chanting or the sutra study or even the Dharma talks. What they think about is meditation. But that begs the question, what is meditation? And also, what's the point of it? Why have people devoted themselves to this practice for 2,600 years? And after all that time, is it still useful in the modern era, in the time of social media and political unrest and joblessness? How can meditation help us deal with the suffering of the world? And to understand that first, we need to understand suffering. We need to have a definition of the word. Now, in Buddhism, we have something called the Four Noble Truths. After Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree and realized enlightenment, he had to take this experience that was beyond words, beyond sounds and symbols and definitions, and he had to try to put it into words out of compassion for all sentient beings. And what he came up with were the Four Noble Truths, which state life is suffering. Suffering is caused by desire. The way to end suffering is to end desire. And the way to end desire is the Noble Eightfold Path. Now, unfortunately, we don't have time to go into each one of these tenets in depth that is actually needed to understand them, but we can get a good understanding first by starting with the first noble truth, which states life is suffering. Now, coincidentally, it's the first noble truth. It's also the one that's most often and most easily misunderstood because it sounds pretty terrible and nihilistic on the surface. Life is suffering, but what about the joy we get from our pets? What about the enjoyment we have from playing with our nieces and nephews, from good food? Doesn't that count for anything? And of course it does. When Buddha said life is suffering, he wasn't saying that we don't have happiness or we don't have joy. What he was doing was reminding us that suffering is a natural and normal part of life. In a certain way, it's inescapable. As an example, the thermostat in my apartment isn't working right now. So I still have heat, but it's no longer automatic. I have to get up and turn the heat on when I want it. And if it gets too hot, I have to turn it off. And then it gets too cold and I turn it on again. And because of COVID-19, it's hard to get maintenance into my apartment for them to make the repairs. Now, the first noble truth tells me life is suffering, and that means that having a broken thermostat is a natural part of life. It's just something that goes along with having an apartment. And because I see it that way, I'm able to not take it so personally. I'm not mad at the world because of the pandemic. I'm not mad at the maintenance people who can't come up and fix it. I'm not mad at the thermostat. I'm annoyed. I'm a human being. I don't like having to get up in the middle of the night and play with the thermostat. But because I understand that life is suffering and that broken thermostats are just a part of life, I'm able to appreciate the joy that comes with having an apartment with heat in the middle of the winter. I'm able to appreciate the fact that it's 20 degrees outside and snowing right now, but if I want to, I can get up and turn on a button and hot air comes out of the vent. So it's that mature understanding of suffering, that acceptance that Buddha is trying to get at with the first noble truth. Not to say that life isn't good or enjoyable, simply to help us understand that sometimes life isn't perfect. And that's important because we here in the West have this idea that it's supposed to be perfect, that we're never supposed to suffer, that if we do everything right, everything will go exactly like it's supposed to, and if it doesn't, it's someone else's fault. If we study for the test and we don't A, we're not smart. If we're kind to our significant other and they break up with us, then we're not good enough. If we go to a job interview and we don't get the job, then our resume isn't stacked enough. We're always looking for someone to blame, even if it's ourselves, because we think suffering isn't supposed to happen. And that leads to all of the political discord that I talked about in the essay. Because if it's not my fault, it must be your fault. I'm suffering and someone needs to fix this right now. And if I have to hurt you to make that happen, then I will. In Buddhism, we get away from that by first practicing acceptance via the first noble truth. Now, the second and third noble truths state that suffering is caused by desire, and the way to end suffering is to end desire. Now, this is the second and third noble truth, and they're also the second and third most misunderstood teachings in Buddhism, because they beg a question. Are we saying that desire is bad? That we're not supposed to desire things? How would we get out of bed if we had no desires? And that's a fair question. And the answer is, we are human beings and we have desires. We're supposed to have desires. If I get hungry, I desire to feed my belly, go to the refrigerator. If I'm tired, I desire to go to sleep. But just like desire is a natural part of life, suffering is also a natural part of life. I desire to have my thermostat work. I suffer when it doesn't. They cycle. Desire, suffering, which leads to more desire, which leads to more suffering. And that's the cycle of samsara that we talk about in Buddhism. So if we understand that suffering and desire are a natural part of life, then the question becomes, how do we break that cycle? And that's the third noble truth. The way to end desire is the Noble Eightfold Path. Or rather, the way to end suffering is to end desire. And the fourth, the way to end desire is the Noble Eightfold Path. And the way we do this is fairly simple in Buddhism. We train our minds, we practice right view and right mindfulness so that we can see our desires clearly. We investigate them. We in the West oftentimes live on autopilot. If we want something, we go and grab it. We don't think about the consequences. We don't think about, is this good for me? Will this cause harm to other people? We desire and we go after it. And this causes problems for ourselves and for other people. So in Buddhism, the first step is to accept that desire is a natural part of life. The second step is to investigate each of our desires, to investigate all the words floating around in our head. And what Buddha discovered 2,600 years ago is that all of our desires fall into one of three categories. They're either good, they're neutral, or they're bad. Bad, not in a moral sense, as if we're bad to have them, but bad as in they cause unreasonable amounts of suffering. So much suffering that they're not worth it. It's better to renounce them, as we would say, and give them up completely. Or maybe they're neutral, which means maybe there's something that isn't necessarily good, but we have to work with it. Or it's something that we want, and it's not bad in and of itself, but it depends on how we work with it that decides how much suffering is associated. So it's neutral. It's good or bad, depending on how we get that desire, how we interact with it. Then we have other desires that are good. They're healthy, they're life-affirming. The more we interact with them, the better our life becomes, the better the lives of other people become. A good example of this is when I was working on an organic farm in upstate New York. I was there doing a Buddhist retreat. I was also working on the farm, helping to care for the animals, grow the plants, etc. And part of the work was gathering wild foods that we would then take to the market. And when I first looked at all the plants in the forest, I thought they were all the same. I didn't know their names. I didn't know what was healthy, what wasn't. But as I worked with the farm owner and we started foraging, I realized that all the plants fell into one of those three categories. They were either bad, like poison ivy, let's say, Nothing good about it. Don't touch it, don't eat it, don't look at it. They're neutral, like let's say cattails, for example, which you can't eat cattails raw, but the roots are actually very good if cooked. They're like wild potatoes, and you can use the seeds, pound them into flour. So it's good or bad, again, depending on how you work with it. If I work with it in a skillful way, cattails are delicious. And there are other plants that are just good. Blackberries, for example. Eat as many blackberries as you want, you'll just be better for it. So our desires work the same way. Desire is a natural thing. It's a part of our lives. So we have to look at those desires and figure out what we're going to do about each one. Do we get rid of it? Do we work with it skillfully? Or do we just go all in? And that sounds very obvious on the surface. Some of you are probably wondering why I'm saying something that a third grader probably knows. But the fact is, our desires are very powerful. So powerful, in fact, that they cloud our minds and stop us from seeing the world clearly. When our mind is filled with desire, we don't think about the karma, as we call it in Buddhism, or the consequences of our actions. We don't investigate our desires. We don't decide if they're good, bad, or neutral. Again, it's just, I want it, so I go after it. Or I want it, and you took it from me, so now I'm going to go after you. So what we have to do is engage in practices that allow us to clear our mind so that we can see our desires clearly and then work with them clearly. This is where meditation comes into play. I always instruct my students to think of their mind like a window. And outside of that window is a bright, sunshiny day. Birds are singing, clouds are going through the sky. It's wonderful. But windows, like our minds, sometimes get dirty. And we don't think any less of windows because they get dirty sometimes. We just understand that's part of the window's nature. So what do? We clean the window. If your childhood was anything like mine, once a week, your mom may have made you pull out the Windex and the paper towel and you spray it down and you rub it, and you have to rub it all in one direction so you don't get streaks. So that's how we deal with windows. And if we consistently over time clean the windows, we see the sunshine outside all the time. Our minds are the same way. They naturally accumulate dirt and dust. Nothing wrong with it. That's just what minds do. It's part of being a human being. But the other side of that is that we have to clean our minds on a regular basis. We have to break out the Windex and the paper towel and scrub so that we can see the world clearly, so we can practice right view and right mindfulness. More than that, we have to clean the window of our mind so we can see our own enlightened nature, what we in Buddhism call our Buddha nature. So in Buddhism, we're taught that we are all inherently good, kind, enlightened beings, that our natures are wise and compassionate. And the practice of Buddhism is learning to manifest that enlightenment in daily life, to act out our enlightened nature. So meditation helps us to do that. It's a two-stage process. First, helps us to work clearly with our desires. Second, it allows us to see our own enlightened nature. And we can all do it. It just takes time. This is what Buddha did 2,600 years under the Bodhi tree. He was a human being just like you and I. He had suffering and desire just like you and I. Over the course of his lifetime, his tribe, the Shakya clan, was wiped out by a rival faction. The monastics in his community misbehaved, threatening their relationship with the community. His cousin, Devadatta, tried to kill him on numerous occasions. And yet he was able to engage in this practice and realize enlightenment. And I say all of this to say, I want you to have a warts and all view of the Buddha. It's important we don't deify him, because if we bring him down to our level, then we bring ourselves up to his level. He was able to realize enlightenment. You're able to realize enlightenment. period. So how do we do that? Well, since this series is about contemplation, we're going to go over some meditation today. And what we're trying to do with meditation, sometimes people have the idea that we want to clear our mind and not have any thoughts. And that's not exactly true. Eventually, over time, our mind's quiet. We have fewer thoughts. This is true. But the goal really isn't to get rid of our thoughts or our feelings or our emotions. It's to allow ourselves first to just sit with them quietly. Because when we have the mind of desire, we don't allow ourselves to feel anything. And it's been my experience, if we don't allow ourselves to feel our anger, our sadness, our grief, it goes away for a while, and then it comes back, and it's even stronger than before. And then we do something else to get away from it, because we're humans, and that's what we do, and it goes away for a while, because we're on social media, or we're watching a movie, and then the movie ends, and all the feelings come back, and now they're even worse. So the first thing we're doing when we're meditating is simply just allowing ourselves to sit with what we're feeling. To learn that we don't have to be scared of our minds. We can be angry, we can be sad, we can be depressed, we can be lonely, and that's fine. The world won't end, we won't fall over, we'll just sit. The second thing we're trying to do with meditation is to see our thoughts clearly. What's going on in my head? Why am I feeling this way? I'm thinking of an experience I had with my nephew when he was younger. He was about 5. And just completely out of nowhere, he started throwing a tantrum. He was screaming and crying and throwing things. And we kept asking him, what's wrong? What's wrong? And finally, he just looked up and said, I don't know. He didn't know. He just didn't feel good. And we often feel that same way. Something's not right. We don't know what it is, but this day just isn't what it's supposed to be. And the goal of meditation isn't necessarily to figure out what's wrong, though sometimes we will. And we'll realize, oh, I had this conversation with this person. I wanted it to go this way, it went a different way. Or oh, I'm just really excited about that exam I had yesterday. And then other times we won't find a solution. And that's okay too. We can just sit with that not knowing. And then finally, we're learning again to deal with our desires, to deal with our thoughts more skillfully. So, like I said in the essay, we have the absolute world and we have the conventional world. The conventional world is the everyday life we live in. That's the movies, the cars, the job, the school, etc. And the absolute world we can think of as our spiritual life. That's a world where everything is perfect, where everything is one, where we again are enlightened beings. And one of the reasons we suffer so much in the conventional world is because we lose sight of the absolute. We lose sight of our enlightened nature, we lose sight of the big picture, and we think that this is all there is. So going back to my broken thermostat, understanding that, yes, this is a problem that needs to be dealt with, but it's not the whole picture, allows me to have a certain amount of peace. And this is true of any problem we might have, whether it's a broken car, whether it's a failed exam, whether it's a family member or a friend who's not acting as we would like. Those are real issues. We need to deal with them. But if we can step back into the absolute and see the big picture, that allows us some breathing space. That's the space between words that I mentioned. So what we're going to do in this practice, first, I'm going to teach you something called meditative breathing. And this is something you can do when you're meditating, but also just in your daily life. So in an elevator, in the car, you engage in this practice and it'll bring you some semblance of peace. After that, we'll do a guided meditation, a visualization exercise. And after that, we'll do our Q&A. The entire practice will take about 15 minutes. I'll keep time, so you don't need to worry about that. And I'll let you guys get into whatever position you feel is most comfortable. We're not training to be samurai, so just the only rule I have is, well, two rules. One, I ask that you don't lay down. Usually people fall asleep when they do that. And two, be in a position where you can breathe easily. All right. So if you want, you can close your eyes. If not, just keep them half closed and pointed downwards at a 45-degree angle. This helps to limit our distractions and help us focus more on the practice. And initially, we're just gonna get comfortable with our bodies. Maybe we rotate our head from left to right, feeling the physical sensations as we do that. Slowly stepping away from words, from the conventional world, getting ready to rest for a while. Now maybe we rotate our shoulders forward. Then back. Again, just feeling those physical sensations. And when we're ready, we just bring ourselves back to center. Now, the first thing we're going to go over is meditative breathing. This is an exercise that's been used for 2,600 years by yogis and Buddhas and Bodhisattvas to find inner peace. It worked for them, so it'll work for you. Want to make sure our back is straight. Just gently breathe in and out through the nose. In through the nose, out through the nose. And what this does is it engages our parasympathetic nervous system. That's the part of our nervous system that says we're safe, that we can relax. And we're just going to breathe for a while. As humans, we have a fight, flight, or freeze response. And for some of us, that can get a little out of whack. And the way our mind tells our body to fight, flee, or freeze is through the breath. That's why when you exercise, you immediately start breathing faster and you breathe through your mouth. That engages the sympathetic nervous system, the go part of our nervous system. So breathing through the nose is how we can hijack that a little bit and just remind ourselves, even in stressful situations, I'm safe, I can relax. All right, that's wonderful. Now we're going to continue with that, and we're just going to add to it a little bit. With every inhale, we're going to push out our belly button, almost like we just had a big meal. And then we let it come back in with every exhale. So inhale, belly button goes out. Exhale, belly button comes back in. And we're just going to breathe. The reason we do this, pushing the belly button out, is that creates space for our diaphragm to drop. And as it drops downward into that empty space, it lets us get a nice full lungful of air. Going back to that fight, flight, or freeze response, a lot of us breathe very shallowly as Westerners, which again is a signal to our body that we have to run, or we have to fight, or we have to hide. So We're taking control of our breath so we can take control of our bodies and our minds. Breathing deeply, breathing through the nose. We're safe, we're calm, we're enlightened beings. And then for the final thing we're going to add to this, remember, part of what we do in meditation is learning to step back away from our thoughts, out of the conventional and into the absolute. So we're not going to clear our minds, but we're going to notice our thoughts. We all have them, it's perfectly normal. And then as we see our thoughts, we're going to notice them, say hello, and then bring our focus back to our breathing. This is called samadhi, or single-pointed concentration. Just like we were doing with the physical movements, we'll focus on the physical sensations of the breath. The feeling of the air moving in and out of our nostrils. The feeling of our chest, our stomach expanding and contracting. And if our mind wanders, if we have one thought or emotion that's especially powerful, that's fine. That's what minds do. We just notice, say hello, and then bring our focus back to the physical sensations of the breath. Wonderful. We're just going to do this for about 2 minutes. We're just going to breathe. We're so frantic in the West, constantly moving from one thing to the next, trying to fix things, trying to make them better. And that's fine, but sometimes we just need to breathe. So we'll do that for 2 minutes. I'll keep time. And then we'll start the visualization. That's great. And again, if our mind wanders, that's perfectly fine. That's what the minds do. We just see our thoughts. We say hello. We bring our focus back to the physical sensations of our breath. And now what we're going to do is begin the visualization exercise. In our mind's eye, we just envision a ball of energy right behind our belly button. And this energy is our favorite color. So if our favorite color is green, the energy is green. If our favorite color is blue, the energy is blue. In Buddhism, this place is called the Hara, and it's the seat of our spiritual power. We're going to envision the energy in our Hara being like a fire. So every time we inhale, it's like we're blowing on that fire and making it bigger, making it brighter. So with every breath, we're strengthening and brightening our spiritual energy. Maybe it grows from the size of a baseball to the size of a softball to the size of a basketball. And with every breath, we're seated even more deeply into our center, into our place of spiritual power. And we're just going to do that for about 2 minutes. We're going to breathe, awakening the fire within us. Noticing that it's always been there. We just couldn't see it before. And I'll keep time, so don't worry about that. And then we'll start the next phase of our visualization. That's wonderful. And now that we've stoked the fire of our spiritual energy, of our enlightenment, we're going to use that energy to send healing throughout our whole body. So we'll start by envisioning pipes running from our hara. Some of them will run down our legs to the bottom of our feet. Some of them will run up our chest, down our shoulders to our fingertips. And one pipe will go up to the top of our head. And we'll notice that we can send our spiritual energy wherever it's needed. It can go to our hearts, our lungs, our hands, our legs. So we're going to start by sending the energy to the bottoms of our feet. With every inhale, the energy gets brighter. With every exhale, it runs down our legs, past our knees, our calves, to the bottom of our feet. So we inhale, the energy gets brighter. We exhale, we push it down our legs. Covering our lower body in healing spiritual energy. And if our mind wanders, that's okay. That's what minds do. We just say hello to our thoughts and bring our focus back to our breathing, back to the visualization. Now we're going to keep that going, but we're going to add to it. With every inhale, the spiritual energy gets brighter. With every exhale, we're going to send energy down to the bottom of our feet through our legs. We're also going to send it up through our chest and down our shoulders to our fingertips. So every inhale, we stoke the fire. With every exhale, energy goes to the bottom of our feet and to our fingertips. And as we do this, we notice that the energy never dims, it never gets weaker. It's almost like the more we use our spirituality, the more we have. Breathing in, breathing out. Just allowing ourselves to be centered for a moment. Giving ourselves a break as we rest in the absolute. And now for the final part of our meditation, we're going to continue everything we did before. We're also going to send energy to the tops of our head. So with every inhale, the energy behind our belly button gets brighter. With every exhale, we send energy to every extremity of our body. You can almost envision it pulsing. Inhale, our hara gets brighter. Exhale, energy goes to every extremity in the body, like the tide going in and out. In and out, in and out. And we're just going to do this. We're just going to breathe and send out energy for 2 minutes. I'll keep time. And then we'll bring our meditation to an end. Wonderful. Now we're going to start pulling that energy back into our hara, that space behind our belly button, the seat of our spiritual power, the seat of our enlightened nature. Draw energy up from the bottoms of our feet, past our calves, past our knees, up into the hara, behind our belly button. Then when we're ready, we'll do the same with the energy in our fingertips, pulling up past our elbows, past our shoulders, down our chest, resting it in the hara. And finally, we'll pull energy from the tops of our head until we're left with a glowing ball of energy resting behind our belly button. And we'll just notice that energy for a while. We'll breathe into it. We'll remind ourselves that this energy is there whenever we need it. Whenever we're upset or we're stressed, whenever the world's not quite right, we can focus on our breath, just like we did today. Breathing through the nose, expanding the belly button with every inhale. We can bring ourselves back to center. When we're ready, when we're firm in that understanding, we can move our heads from side to side, bringing ourselves back into our bodies. We can rotate our shoulders forward and back. And when we're ready, not before, we can open our eyes. Well, I hope that helped you. Like I said, that's something you can do anytime, anywhere. Sometimes it's hard to do the visualization if we're in class, let's say, or in the car, but the meditative breathing through the nose, extending the belly button, we can do that anywhere. So always remember, you always have your breath if you need it. We have a few minutes left. I'd love to answer questions if there are any.
I have one. Well, thank you, first of all, for everything and for sharing the passage from your book and the meditation as well. I went through some trauma and a betrayal from like my ex-best friend in the fall, and am working on moving forward for that. And I think one of the aspects of that is forgiveness. And I was just curious to hear if you had anything to say about forgiveness and its relation to suffering and desire, or just anything you could touch upon moving forward or healing, and whatever you'd like to talk about, I'm happy to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, forgiveness, betrayal, they all, everything starts with desire. And again, desire is a natural part of life, but that means the suffering is also part of that. So we have family and we have friends and we have ways we want to be treated, which again is natural and normal, but the world doesn't always give us what we want. People don't always give us what we want. They have their own desires and sometimes they act unskillfully, and it can be hard to know how to respond to that. Like I said, the Buddha dealt with many betrayals in his life, from family members, from his monks, etc. And what we do in this situation, I think sometimes in the West, we are too quick to rush towards forgiveness. And what I mean by that isn't that forgiveness isn't important, because it is. There's a great relief when we can finally forgive someone, but before we get to the forgiveness piece, we have to deal with the wound that we have, right? So if you can imagine if you were bleeding from a cut, let's say, there's some steps you have to take before you get to the healing, right? You have to stop the bleeding, you have to apply a bandage, and then the cut heals. And with psychic betrayals, with mental, spiritual, emotional betrayals, it's the exact same thing. And sometimes we as spiritual practitioners think that we're supposed to forgive immediately. And we don't allow ourselves to feel what we're feeling as a result of what happened. So what I encourage students to do is to put a step between the betrayal and the forgiveness. And that step is acceptance. So not saying that we weren't hurt or that we deserved what happened, but simply accepting the fact that it did happen. Accepting the fact that this isn't a situation that we can or even necessarily should fix. And what that does, if we focus on the acceptance piece first, is it gives us time to heal, right? Because a lot of times when we hear that word forgiveness, we think that we're not hurt anymore, or that we're best friends with the person, or that we like them. And that's not necessarily the case. Forgiveness from the Buddhist standpoint means we don't hold any anger anymore, or that we don't have any feelings of ill will anymore. But that's a very different thing from what we normally think of forgiveness as. Everything's as it was before. I always use the example of a porcupine. We don't have any ill will towards porcupines. They're enlightened just like we are, but we also know not to hug them. So that's why the acceptance piece is important. If we've experienced a betrayal, if we learn to just accept that this is where this person is in the moment, then we stop trying to build a relationship that isn't there and maybe can't be there. I find that meditation is very helpful with this in dealing with the emotions that we have around the betrayal. When we get caught up in the feelings of anger, sadness, despair, to step back to that space between words like we did earlier can help us get out of that cycle. And help us get out of that mental, why did this happen? Why did they do this? How could I have done it differently? Then once we get to that place of acceptance, once we've cleared our minds, then we can look into forgiveness and can the relationship be repaired? Should it be repaired? If so, what does that look like? So those are, I could talk a lot about this, so I'm kind of holding myself back, but I'd say that's the key, is we start with acceptance, not forgiveness, and just allowing ourselves to feel our emotions, and then also allowing ourselves to step back and not necessarily allowing ourselves to let go of our desire to have things be like they were before, because that may or may not be necessary, may or may not be available to us.
Thank you. That's definitely helpful. I mean, everything you said today was helpful, but that too.
Thank you. I'm glad I could help.
I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I know, does anyone else have any other question? We started a few minutes late, so.
I have one question, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, first, I just want to say thank you so much for saving some time to share your wisdom with us. Like, it means so much. I just have a question about when you talked about desire and accepting the desires that we have in our life, and then we put it into the categories of good, neutral, or bad. What do we do like after that? Like, what do you do after that once you do accept that specific desire or those desires? Like, what's like the end goal in that, I guess?
Sure. So the end goal of Buddhism, in Mahayana Buddhism at least, is something called the Bodhisattva vow, which there are 4 vows. Sentient beings are numberless. I'll save them. Delusions are endless. I'll see through them. The teachings are infinite. I'll learn them. The Buddha way is difficult. I'll walk the path. And to put that all into one short sentence, our goal is to realize enlightenment so that we can save ourselves and others from suffering. So every teaching, every path that we have in Buddhism comes back to that. How do we save ourselves and others from suffering? So when we're working with our desires, that's really the lens that we're using. We're putting them into categories good, bad, or neutral. And then we figure out, how do I work with this desire in a way that creates the least amount of suffering and the most amount of joy, both for myself and other people. And both of those are equally important. Sometimes in spirituality, we think I don't matter, it's all about others. And that's not correct, for multiple reasons. But one, we have compassion for all sentient beings, and that includes us. And the opposite sometimes for other people is that we only care about ourselves and we don't care about others. And that's equally as bad. So it's a two-way street. But we use that lens of, how do I eliminate suffering and create joy for myself and others, to figure out what am I going to do with each of these desires. Okay, so that's how I categorize them as good, bad, or neutral. And then that's also how I figure out how I'm going to work with it, right? So I'm trying to think of a simple example. Let's say it's my friend's birthday and I want to get them a gift, right? But I only have so much money. Well, it's natural to desire to want to do something nice for my friend, but I also have the suffering of not having money in my bank account. So that's what I would call a neutral desire. I have to work with it skillfully. So what I would do in that case, as a real world example, is I get them a gift, but I ensure it's a gift I can afford. Right? So that way I'm showing them I care, but I'm also not putting myself in a bad financial position. So that'd be an example of a neutral desire and how I would work with that.
Okay, yeah, I definitely understand. Like finding some sort of balance. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Sensei Alex, am I hearing correctly that, are you going to be speaking at Ripple this year?
I believe so. Yes.
Okay. I wasn't sure. I think I'd heard some rumblings about that. So for those of you who haven't been or participated, Ripple is a student-led. It's an interfaith conference that happens every year in February, and I believe that Sensei Alex is now going to be on some panels and maybe in some breakouts. So there's some opportunities to continue this this conversation, hopefully, because I always benefit from spending time with you, and I appreciate you so much. Sensei Alex, do you think you could close us out with a prayer or a blessing?
Sure. Sure. Absolutely. Oh, goodness. Okay. Okay. Well, let's do this. First, I want to let you guys know, if you have other questions that come up after we're done speaking, you can email me. My email address is sameoldzen@gmail.com. So just send me an email with any questions you have about tonight's talk or Buddhism in general, and I'll be sure to respond. Let's see. So we have something in Buddhism called the metta prayer, or the loving kindness prayer. And it's based on the Bodhisattva vows, which I mentioned earlier. So I'll recite that now. If you'd like to participate, you can just close your eyes and place your hands together in Gasho. And what this is, it symbolizes the coming together of the absolute and the conventional being one. It also symbolizes us coming together with other sentient beings. And the metta prayer goes like this. May all beings be happy. May all beings be healthy. May all beings be safe. May all the power of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas protect all sentient beings. Amidala.
Thank you all for spending time with us. And thank you again, Sensei Alex. And like I said, I really hope that we get to sit with you again sometime soon.
Absolutely. This is just as wonderful for me as I hope it is for you guys. Thanks so much for having me.
Y'all have a great evening. Take care.
Thank you so much. You as well.
So much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.